Welcome back to our kind of closing session. We're going to attempt to do the impossible with this session, which is to pull together the threads of all of the incredible things we've heard today. So we're excited. I'm so glad that so many people are still here. I want to do a few things really quickly, and then I'm going to let our panel speak. I want to explain what the format for this session. I also want to just take a chance now to thank the organizers again from this conference, the Food Literacy Project students, and particularly Margiana Peterson-Rockney, who are incredible. And the Food Law Society students who have done an incredible job as well. And from my staff, the Food Law and Policy Clinic, especially Christina Rice and Ona Balkas. So what we've planned for this last session together is we had some students help us gather up all of the question cards from all the sessions that were in this room and pull together some of the themes that we've heard about. So I'm going to kind of share back with you because I know we often ran out of time. There were a lot of ideas, and we really want to give voice to your thoughts and ideas. I'm going to share some of those main themes, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panel, which I'll quickly introduce, and they are each going to kind of give some of their reactions to those themes and their just reflections on the day. So we'll talk for a little bit, and then we're going to turn it to you to reflect in your groups at your table. And unlike the other sessions where you wrote down questions or it was focused on asking questions to us, we're going to ask you from your table to come up with one or two of your takeaways, and then we'll go around and have you share those with us, and then the panel will get to react, and we'll have a little bit of a dialogue. And we are going to finish that all up a little bit before 5 so that we can have the student leaders come back up and say some closing remarks, and we'll get you out of here on time. So let me just first introduce our panel. You have, I'm sure, met many of these amazing people throughout yesterday and today, but just to really quickly introduce in case you have not. Starting directly to my right is Professor Amy Cohen, who is a professor of law at Ohio State University Moritz College of Law, where she studies informal and formal dispute resolution, competing ideologies of law and international development, and the political economy of food. And we have been incredibly lucky to have her visiting here at Harvard Law School for the year, where she's an alumna. And she's teaching a fantastic course on food, global food policy, and international development. So we've been lucky to have her, and I wish we could keep her. Next to her is Amber Kanasba-Crotty, who was just speaking in here on the last panel, and I know inspired so many people. She is a Navajo Nation Council delegate and member of the Health, Education, and Human Services Committee. And she comes from a long legacy. Ona just said this, and she has an incredible bio, and I'll let her introduce herself in more detail. But she's from a long legacy of women leaders, strong weavers, tenacious sheep herders, and loving grandmas, which I absolutely love. Next after her is Janelle O'Keefe, who is one of 7 co-founders and the Land and Policy Support Specialist at Keep Growing Detroit, and has been working in Detroit's urban agriculture movement since 2009. And next after her, Smita Narula, who needs no introduction for those of you who were here this morning and heard what I'm sure for most of us was possibly the best keynote I've ever heard. So I'll leave it at that. And then finally, Deborah Nunes Lino da Silva, who spoke here yesterday, and I know many people heard and were very, very inspired by her. She's been a militant of MST for many years and has been part of the MST direction board in the state of Alagoas, northeast of Brazil, and has contributed in many national tasks in the movement as a member of the National Coordination Board and in the production sector, and she herself is a farmer. So before I turn it over to Amy, who I'm going to have go first, let me just share with you some of the themes that came up, and I think these will really resonate from those of you who have been contributing and writing down your ideas on cards throughout the day. So I think some things that we saw when we put them all together were questions of how do we build alliances? And I think one thing that really struck me being here was hearing there's lots of different voices and people coming from local areas, from indigenous communities, from other countries, and there's shared struggle, but how do we build alliances across those and with those who are working to support those communities? So that's one question that's come up. Another question that was in many of the cards we read was around what are some of the tangible laws and policies we can use as practical steps to change, and how do we get from here to the future we'd like to see, where land is more accessible and used in beneficial ways. And to add on to that, something I've been thinking is, how do we craft those laws in ways that really support smallholder farmers and support agroecology and aren't subject to exploitation by the same companies, by the same agribusiness and small large landholders. So how can we craft those in ways that will work? We had a lot of questions about education and knowledge and whose knowledge matters, and what does it mean, especially to be talking about these in an educational institution and taking these back into the education we're giving. The role of privilege in the progressive change in food, and this came up a lot this morning, and I was inspired by Smita's remarks about facing our own privilege. The role of corporate power, and this comes up in discussions we saw throughout people's note cards and questions around, is it dismantling corporate power, engaging corporate power? There's a tension inherent there. How do we grapple with these issues? Is food policy a white space, and how do we change that without marginalizing those that are doing good? And I think this brings up a lot what we've discussed about who are the people that are being dispossessed of land or have been dispossessed of land, and yet who are the people coming to the table often in discussions about food policy, and how can we bring those two together so that we're really making this inclusive? And then a lot of questions were about how do you actually enact land distribution and build on-the-ground capacity? And this started with our discussion last night. What would it look like to actually redistribute land? So these are not my ideas. These came from all of you. And I'm now going to turn it over and let each of our panelists give some remarks, and then we'll turn it back to you to give your thoughts and share them with all of us so that we can have some more discussion. So Amy.
Wow. Thank you all. This has been such an amazing, inspiring conference. And I'm so honored to be sitting here with these panelists that I've learned so much from. So some themes that I heard. What ideas do we have against economic exclusion? We have participation, we have self-determination, we have solidarity, we have being an ally, we have sharing, we have land reform that serves a broader social function. We have calls for a political and economic system where people can provide for themselves with dignity and agency and control. Control. So many folks talked about control over markets, over lands, over seeds, a sense of wanting to take back control over the conditions of our lives so that people can provide, so that allies can support the communities that provide food for themselves in a sustainable and dignified manner. So I just want to suggest that one way to knit some of these themes together is to think about how they reflect calls for economic democracy. So a couple days ago at Harvard Law School, there was a celebration for the 100-year anniversary of the appointment of Justice Brandeis to the Supreme Court. And he's someone who was at the center of power, but he was also a really iconic example of what a legal commitment to economic democracy could mean. So I just want to say that Brandeis did things like uphold state laws that made it harder for the big chain stores and easier for the independent and cooperative grocery stores to operate. And he justified this distinction on political grounds. Side by side, this is some of his language, side by side with political democracy comes industrial democracy. Democracy demands distributing power, consumer power, economic power, political power, and the power of human creative development. So a question of who distributes food for him was a core question of political and economic democracy. So food, we know, is this really powerful catalyst to think about economic democracy. And I just want to quickly say, I think this is the case for two reasons. First, because when we debate how food is produced and distributed, we're fundamentally debating the structures of economic exchange. When we fight about food, we're fighting about what fairness looks like in markets and in economic life. So unless we believe in state provisioning, I think we just need a vision. We need a vision of a just democratic market that's a counter to corporate power. But secondly, and more deeply, food is such a powerful catalyst to talk about economic democracy because people's relationships to food, and we heard this over and over, are organized around continuous and repetitive practices: cooking, serving, eating, producing, processing, trading. The repetitive labor of food constitutes us and our social relationships. This is the sort of intertwining of foodways and lifeways. So for this reason, I think food is such a powerful tool to reimagine ourselves in addition to our communities and economies. This is the core anarchist idea. This was Smita's idea that if we want to change structures, we have to change ourselves. But what about law? So what about law as we reflect on our conference, right? One of the themes that Emily sort of reflected back to you all. What legal rules would create markets that were based on peasant-farmer livelihoods, land reforms, reparations, deconcentration of corporate capital, democracy in the really deepest sense? So I just want to offer that beginning to articulate new legal ideas would, I think, require us with Brandeis to learn to think and talk really rigorously about scale and size, about the local and the small, as representations for alternative ways to think about capitalism. And I think this won't be an easy thing to do, in fact, a very hard thing to do, for at least two reasons. So reason one is because we'd be up against a very powerful consensus in law and economics that privileges the formal equality of all market actors. A market actor is a market actor, and that aims to configure markets without jurisdictional or geographical bounds, right? A global market. And also a regulatory regime that allows firms to expand and expand as long as they're maximizing the total surplus value produced in an economy. Right? This is the sort of legal institution of the efficiency idea and the production idea that Smita discussed this morning. And these are all arguments entrenched in law that function as a really powerful defense of bigness. Right? So we need a language in law to talk about the small, to talk about the local. But talking about the local and the small in law would also be hard because there's nothing intrinsically emancipatory about these categories, right? It's only the values and social practices and processes that these concepts encode, right? So the sort of, is the food movement a white movement? I love Julie Guthman's line. She writes, quote, "Eating local, organic, seasonal food that you prepared yourself may be pleasurable, but it's not universally so, nor is it tantamount to affecting social justice," end quote. Right? Instead, we have to constantly do the work that everyone in this conference is so deeply committed to, thinking about how resistance can not only democratize access to land or access to power, but also by relentlessly asking who this resistance serves and with what effects on labor, on class, on gender, on family relations, on indigeneity, on race. But I think for this reason, food activism is such a fertile opportunity for the lawyers in the room. And I think it's an opportunity to think about a legal architecture of economic democracy. I love the feminist economist Gibson Graham. I love their call to take back the economy. And a lot of the conversations I heard here today sound to me like a call to take back law.
Thank you, Shadeja, for that. To reintroduce myself, kia ani nishle do bilagana bashichin, deschini deshache do bilagana deshanole, she amber kinas bakradi inishe tohatso in the nutshell. And that's just placing myself of who I am as a Navajo woman, my clans that represent our 4 different clans, and my place of emergence and existence in a sleepy area called Tohatsoy on just west of the Chushkai Mountains in the Four Corners region of New Mexico. I do sit on the Navajo Nation Council as a delegate, which simply means we're similar to senators. We do have a land base that's roughly the size of West Virginia. We have 325,000 citizens, and so half of our citizens do live in urban areas, but there's still a majority back home where we still have our elders, we still have our language, and we have a functioning court system, executive system with our presidency, and then I'm represent here the legislator. On the council, I sit on the Health, Education, Human Service Committee, which provides me to a lot of information on the impact of our people in terms of the education, in terms of the health impacts and the legacy. And so what I wanted to do is just situate where I'm coming from, basically on the front lines, basically at the ground level. I love it when my uncle said, it's not even grassroots. We're right there at that beginning seed in the dirt, sitting in that hogan, our home, our dwelling, and talking and discussing the issues through our lens, through our Navajo way of life, through what we value as a people. And so that may be the biggest difference in terms of how we talk, how we situate the problem, and most importantly, how we can work with different allies in looking at the difficult situations. This is my first time in Boston, and I appreciate being here in this space. But I was asked by the food clinic's intern, was, Ms. Crotty, who controls the food in your schools? And so we have nearly 100 schools, small schools on our nation, and it was very interesting and still at this time and place that I can say here that the Navajo Nation does not have complete control over what our children eat, what our children are taught, and in the language that our children are taught. And so we still, at this time, struggle with having complete control over our land, over our people, over our resources, and that then trickles down to some of the issues and the situations that you may have been enlightened with during this discussion. And how food connects us all is food in terms of whether it's organic or locally sourced, non-GMO. For us, it's medicine. It's a nourishment. And without our connection to our food, without connection to our corn, to our beans, to our squash, that disconnects us from our ceremonies, that disconnects us from our healing, from our mental well-being, and it disconnects us from our Creator, our holy ones, our Dien Dene'e, who had actually thought about our little were considered five-finger people when they thought and blew us into life. Literally, we came out as ears of corn, representing the woman and representing the man. And so how does GMO corn impact us? Dramatically. How do you use pollen from that corn that does not reproduce life? It kills us systematically. We do not need scientists to let us know. We just need to understand what are these corporations doing, and then now how we can rally against that. And who is the authority on our food system? Simply for myself, it's Grandma and her teachings. And the teaching of all of our mothers is changing woman. And those are the songs and the prayers and the thoughts that we ground ourselves in. And I was asked earlier, how can we partner? How can we ally? Then you come to Navajo Nation. You connect yourself with our land. You connect yourself with the prayer. You connect yourself with the food and with the water, and then you're connected to the people. I guess we could talk a lot in theoretics about privilege and if this is a white space and not. We don't have that luxury for a discussion. If you do not want to acknowledge that, then it's something that I would say is your own burden. But you're just, without that acknowledgement, you're handicapping yourself in terms of this movement, in terms of the people that are trying to simply rebuild their communities, to rebuild themselves, to heal themselves. And so I would say then you're no better than the global capitalist industries that are trying to separate us from the land and take our land. And so I feel very strongly and convicted about it because in our communities, we are dependent on natural resource extraction. The state of Arizona and California have fought us for nearly 100 years to access our own water. Matter of fact, the northern part of our country is the Colorado River, and to this day, we have no water rights to that river. And so when we talk about the cities of Phoenix and Tucson, Las Vegas, California, those cities and those communities have been created on the backs of the indigenous people and the displacement of land and resources. And I'm sure that's the same story that you will hear in the East Coast. And so that is where I'm coming from, my place of reflection. But I appreciate all of the good words and the strategies and how we can come together to move forward, because it's not for us. When Grandma survived that long walk, when Grandma survived what she had to do to make sure that I was here, that's what I have to do now for my children. So I did bring my girls, and I didn't bring them so that they could be part of the conversation, but I brought them to remind me why we're doing this, and hopefully to remind you why we do this. It's not for academic experience. It's not for your own self-gain. It's for the people. And if it's not for the people, that will be revealed, and the people will discount you, no longer trust you, and then your only option then is to be exiled. And we have done that. So I appreciate the time. Thank you.
I first need to say I'm incredibly humbled to be sitting at this table. And second, because I was asked to join this table about an hour ago. So I'm slightly less prepared than the fellow women I'm sitting behind, and that's incredible thoughts to follow. If you were in the panel that Amber was on earlier, she asked, and now I wanted to incorporate that into my introduction, of naming the place and peoples from where I come. So I'm here from Detroit, and a long time ago, the lands of Detroit were lived on and tended by the Fox tribe, the Wyandot tribe, and the Ottawa tribe, and then the French came. And I also want to honor where my people came from and my own ancestors, who are Lithuanian and Irish and left their countries because of the same things we're talking about today and that Joe talked about in the keynote yesterday, that they left their countries and their native place to find somewhere they could have control of their lives and their livelihoods. So I'm Janelle O'Keefe. I'm here on behalf of Keep Growing Detroit, which is an organization dedicated to promoting a food sovereign Detroit, which we define as the majority of fruits and vegetables Detroiters consume are being grown by residents within the city limits. It sounds like an incredible, lofty goal, and it is, but one of the amazing things about Detroit is the people that live there, but also the space and the place that we have. There's roughly 20 square miles of vacant land in Detroit, of a 140 square mile city. And to be food sovereign, we only need about 5,000 acres, which is only about a third of that vacant space. So it sounds lofty to say you want to have a city where the fruits and vegetables you're eating and your neighbors are eating are grown there, but in Detroit, it's something we really, really can achieve. So in light of that and what I do, I have lots of thoughts about the questions that Emily shared, and they're not going to be connected, so forgive the disjointedness as I talk about it. I've been thinking a lot about the linguistics and semantics of the words we use and the words we've been talking about today. And urban agriculture is always talked about as this new thing, and it's the sexy topic of the time, and everybody wants to know about urban ag. And in Detroit and in lots of other places, it's not actually new. Calling it urban agriculture is new, but growing food in that place is not new. The first varieties of squash that are known in Detroit are 2,000 to 4,000 years old. The French came and settled, and they planted ribbon farms. And those ribbon farms are the geography of the city that we have now. Streets came between farms, and those are the same streets we drive and walk and bike on today. And that KGD, and if you were in our panel today, we'll always try and honor that and share that history, that what we're doing now is not new. We're just new people to it. All right. The other thing I always like to acknowledge, and especially from what Amber just said, is that I'm a white person here talking about the city of Detroit, which is 85% people of color. And I just like to say that I'm aware of that, and I acknowledge it. And it's important to share because there is a lot of conversation and critique in our city about who is moving in and who is moving out. And if you've moved in, you look like me a lot of the times. And if you've stayed, you don't look anything like me. And the conflict that can happen there, but also the space there is for real conversation around privilege and around is food policy or is it urban ag a white space? And in Detroit, it's not. In Detroit, the people doing urban agriculture are the people that have lived there and the people oftentimes that chose to stay. If you don't know Detroit, it hit its peak population in about 1950 at 2 million people. We're at about 700,000 today, which sounds like a dramatic drop-off, but it's still a lot of people. And that's what I always like to try and share is 700,000 people is still a lot of people to live in a place, and a lot of people that chose to stay and a lot of people that couldn't leave, even if they wanted to. All right, keeping with disjointed. On the other things reflecting on, I was thinking about alliances and tangible laws and policies, which I think the urban agriculture and community has done, in Detroit has done an incredible amount of, and just want to encourage and say that oftentimes, the process is equally or more important than your outcome. In the panel I spoke on earlier, we were talking about how we got our urban agriculture ordinance. And while our ordinance is great and it's held up as exemplary across the country, what's more important is how we got it. And I want to encourage everybody in the work that you're doing as you go home that the process and how you do the work is just as important as why or the goal you're striving to achieve. And that sometimes it can be worth it to take a little longer to do it better. In Detroit, our urban agriculture process took, I think, almost 7 years from start to finish. But what we ended up with was incredible. And the alliances and relationships that were built not just across race, but across sector and across geography are very powerful and really kind of pushed the entire movement forward. And now you have conversations that happen between food producers and food processors and food distribution that weren't happening before. You have conversations that are happening in Detroit, happening with people from the state. And Michigan is a very agricultural heavy state. We actually have the second most crop diversity of any state in the country, only to California, which is something a lot of people don't know. Agriculture is the second biggest industry in Michigan. I believe first is tourism, or it's flip-flopped. So ag is a very big conversation in our state and in our city. So using process and keeping your mind to that. And while there are lots of things in crisis, and Amber said in her talk earlier that we're in crisis, and Detroit and my state is in crisis, and I'm sure lots of you have seen that over the last couple months as Flint, and I don't know what the story of Flint is being told outside of my state, but it's heartbreaking, and it's heartbreaking not just because the water's bad. It's heartbreaking because people have lost all the value in their homes because nobody's going to buy a house in Flint. And it's heartbreaking because there's a strong urban agriculture community there that now is not only dealing with how do we make sure the soil we grow in is safe, but how do we make sure the water we water our plants with is safe. And Flint is this just perfect storm, or imperfect storm because it's not perfect, of policies that, a lot of what we've talked about race and things in different ways here, but what we talk about a lot in Detroit and in Flint is the kind of structural racism or the inadvertent racism of policies. And in Michigan, the Flint crisis came out of emergency management. In Michigan, 80% of the non-white population lives under emergency management, whether it's your city or your school system. In Detroit, our public schools have been under emergency management for almost 10 years. So I think there's you want to be aware of the crisis, but also always look at pulling out of it. It's not just we need to get Flint safe water, and there was incredible amounts of bottled water drives, and Flint doesn't have city recycling. So we created a problem in trying to solve a problem. And so just encouraging to always take that, dig deeper and look at what are all the factors that got you to whatever crisis you're facing. And then the last one, I just want to talk about place. And I have a colleague in Detroit named Lauren Hood who I love, who always lifts up local knowledge and education, because in Detroit, it's very fascinating to live in a place where people are coming to study you, which is not an experience white people often get to have. But in Detroit, every other day, people are knocking on my door at work saying, I'm here from France, and can you show us around? We want to look at your gardens. Can I have 8 hours of your time to tell, because we want to make a film. And sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's just frustrating. But Lauren always likes to say that in Detroit, residents have a PhD in place. They might not have a PhD from an academic institution, but they have a PhD in their place. So I think that's it. I love that phrase. I love that mentality. And I'd like to leave you with that, and I'm going to stop.
Bom, eu primeiro quero dizer que saio daqui com muitos aprendizados, né, e com a disposição ainda maior de continuar lutando pela libertação dos povos, pela garantia da terra para homens e mulheres que querem trabalhar nela.
First of all, I want to say thank you that I live here with a lot of encouragement and inspiration to continue struggling for a better world, for a world that is and also for the liberation of peoples, of the different people.
Outra questão que me chama bastante atenção aqui durante a conferência é que nós ouvimos falar dos Estados Unidos, do Brasil, da África, da Índia, e é interessante como os problemas vivenciados nesses diversos locais são comuns.
So here we talk about different situations in different countries, in United States, in India, in Africa, in Ethiopia, in Brazil. And one thing it's very striking to her is that it's very similar, the problems and the issues.
E ainda que tenham formatos diferentes, né, isso também nos remete a dizer que as causas, né, são também, quem provoca são também os mesmos agentes.
Even if the problems look like different, but the causes are the same.
E por isso precisamos pensar, será que as alternativas e a resolução desses problemas também não precisam de uma solução comum, né, das diversas organizações e povos no mundo?
So, and that should make us think if the problems are similar, shouldn't be the solutions be similar, be shared and developed collectively?
Bom, mas eu quero tratar aqui das questões apresentadas, né, 4 questões.
I want to address the 4 questions that have been brought to me.
Uma em relação à terra.
One is related to the land.
Acredito que há um limite na judicialização do tema da terra.
So I believe that is the legal framework, the struggle for land through the judicial system is limiting. Cannot be the only solution.
Porque a não garantia dos direitos dos povos indígenas, dos quilombolas, dos camponeses não é por falta de leis.
So the indigenous people, the Afro-descendants, the quilombolas, the peasants, they don't have access to land is not because of the lack of laws.
Porque aí é um exemplo do Brasil, se as leis fossem aplicadas, nós não teríamos ainda hoje, em pleno século XXI, trabalhadores e camponeses sendo assassinados porque reivindicam a posse da terra.
So if laws was the problem for people not having access to land until today in Brazil, we won't have the problem of people being killed, being assassinated because of the organizing to defend the land rights.
Então, o grande desafio é como é que a terra precisa ser entendida como ela precisa ser um patrimônio da humanidade que precisa estar a serviço dessa humanidade, pois toda a humanidade, independente de ser camponês, de ser urbano, depende da terra como condição para a sua existência.
So that takes us to see the land as a common wealth, a common good that belongs to the whole humankind. If that land has to be at service, to sustain all of us as a humankind.
Uma outra questão que eu trago também como questão que perpassa o debate é como que a construção de alianças, né, alianças nessa perspectiva de ser a junção, de ser a unidade na diversidade, pode apontar para os caminhos que resolvam esse problema.
So the second question was the issue of the alliances. How we build alliances, how those alliances reflect our unity in our diversity of ideas.
E a construção de alianças, ela passa pela coletivização do entendimento da resolução dos problemas.
So, and to build alliances, we need to build a shared analysis. We need to collectivize our thinking, our shared vision of a common future. E a gente geralmente constrói alianças com aqueles que têm a disposição que são afetados pelos mesmos problemas, pelas mesmas questões e que precisam juntar-se, somar forças para poder buscar os caminhos alternativos. And it's possible to build alliances when the people involved and interested to build that alliance share the understanding of the problems and share the understanding of the need of the building that alliance.
E a construção de alianças, ela passa necessariamente pela superação de um valor da sociedade capitalista que é o individualismo.
So, and to build alliances, we have to overcome one of the reflections of that capitalist society, which is the individualism.
Então, o desafio está lançado. Nós precisamos entender que os problemas que as companheiras que aqui pela manhã colocaram, da violência que as mulheres sofrem, camponesas sofrem, seja na exploração do trabalho, seja na violência sexual nos Estados Unidos, também se reproduz no Brasil e precisa também ser enfrentado pelas mulheres, pelos trabalhadores, pelos camponeses brasileiros.
So in this morning, she heard sisters talking about the violence in the fields, the sexual violence against them, the sexual violence in the United States, and for them in Brazil also, they also see the same issues, and that's the summit that bring people together. That's the shared analysis.
E aí, o que a gente precisa, talvez, é buscar quais são as formas, né? A construção das alianças, a solidariedade, ela pode acontecer desde a denúncia, né, a tirar da invisibilidade essas situações, mas também na construção de lutas unitárias a nível global. Que nós precisamos... as formas, talvez discutir que forma nós vamos fazer para a construção das alianças e para a solidariedade, seja na denúncia ou em lutas concretas.
So how we make that possible, the alliance something concrete, and that will happen when we can struggle together. We build shared processes to advance our struggle.
E um outro elemento que vejo que é fundamental é a formação política ideológica.
And the other very important point is the political training, political education, the ideological education.
O capital não vai formar os trabalhadores, os camponeses, os estudantes para a transformação dessa sociedade.
The capital won't form people, the workers. They're not going to provide the political training and ideological training for the workers.
Então somos nós que precisamos buscar garantir o acesso a esse conhecimento que possibilite a transformação e a emancipação dos homens e mulheres.
So that political education will come from us. It's only us that are going to be able to overcome our challenges and liberate ourselves.
E, dentro desse processo, a organização é fundamental. O MST só é o que é o MST porque se constituiu enquanto um movimento de massas capaz de fazer o enfrentamento ao capital.
And that political training, that process of building alliances only happen when the workers are organized. You need to have an instrument, an organization for make that happen.
Porque o capital é forte, é articulado e precisa também de respostas à altura. E só a organização com formação política, com homens e mulheres que discordam desse formato de sociedade, é possível transformá-la.
So because the capital is well organized and powerful, and only powerful organizations can actually fight back and contain the capital.
Bom, por fim, nós aprendemos na luta cotidiana que a vitória pertence a quem sonha.
So in our struggle in the MST, we learned that the victory, the success only belongs to those who struggle, who fight.
Mas a quem sonha e quem se coloca em marcha para construir esse sonho.
Yeah, so I have to correct myself. What she was saying was that the victory belongs only to those who dream, and those who dream to struggle for a better life.
Então, estejamos todos nós, homens e mulheres aqui, convocados a construir os caminhos para a superação dessa ordem e a transformação necessária da sociedade.
So what she said is very, very powerful, and I'll do my best to translate that. So I think I'm gonna ask her for help.
Somos convidados. Tá. Então, somos todos e todas convocados a sermos construtores da transformação.
So we, men and women, are invited, called to build that collective process.
Obrigada.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. My heart is so full. Is your heart full? And we just take a breath, just together. Okay. What an amazing conversation we are having. What an amazing, amazing, open-hearted conversation that we are having. My heart is so, so full. I'll add just a few more things to the beautiful richness of the conversation we just had, and then the conversation that we've had since yesterday and into today, and I'll offer it through a reflection of everything that I've heard from you and the exchanges that I've had. I have sensed an incredible longing and yearning for cracking ourselves open and bringing ourselves fully into this conversation. I have felt a real desire to kind of shed a lot of the assumptions and the labels and sort of the restrictions with which we usually talk and speak and act in these spaces. And I've felt a lot of that kind of love and openness in these interactions with you. And I want to reflect that back to you because it's an incredible thing to go through the day and to talk to you all and to hug you and to hear you and to hear your words back at me and how my words landed on you. It's a gift. And I just want to say there's just incredible kind of energy and readiness to be transformative in this room right now in a very powerful and collective sense. I want to answer a couple of the questions very briefly, and I want to bring it back to the conversation that I think we're circling around, which is conversations around, what do we do? How can we pull ourselves into a transformative space? How can we imagine a different future? And how can we fight the challenges and the systems to get into that future? I want to come back to what some of the things that I was saying this morning, that to me this is deeply about shifting consciousness, and that's really where this has to begin. It has to begin here, and it has to travel up here, and then it has to emanate. And the way that it needs to happen is for us to also acknowledge that we're actually dealing with a crisis of knowledge, and a very specific kind of knowledge. And it's a crisis of higher education and all forms of education. We are in higher institutions of higher education in which we are taught in no uncertain terms and over years and years that we are about individualism, that we are here in a competitive environment, and we are not taught to be collaborative. We are not taught to be a community. We are not taught that we are together and one species and connected to this planet. And then we are expected, after 12, 4, however many years of indoctrination, to suddenly come up with ideas that break those assumptions and that model. And that's why we're struggling. We're struggling because we literally don't have the knowledge and the tools to imagine a collaborative way of living. What would our economy look like if it was based on collaboration and not on competition? What policies would we make if we realized that we were deeply connected to ecology and to one another? It would look nothing like the world we have now. What are the ideas that we would offer into this space if we were armed with a different kind of knowledge? And to me, that's the work that really needs to be done, and then everything else flows from that. And I'm amazed at this room. Thank you. I'm amazed at this room because despite all that indoctrination and the building of those cultural assumptions that are running like tapes in our mind, there's so many ideas for how to be disruptive in this room, despite that education, and I applaud you for it, and I'm learning from it. I want to quote a friend of mine and a colleague of mine, Tony Cortese, who's done an immense amount to kind of build justice and sustainability to be the heart of higher education, and I'm indebted to him for the words that I'm about to say. Much of higher education curricula tends not to ask students to challenge the following common assumptions. 1, humans are the dominant species and separate from the rest of nature. 2, resources are free and inexhaustible. 3, Earth's ecosystems can assimilate all human impacts. 4, technology will solve most of society's problems. 5, all human needs and wants can be met through material means. And 6, individual success is independent of the health and well-being of communities, cultures, and the life support system. That is what we have been taught. That is what we are learning. And it is in the context of those cultural assumptions that we need to break through and be transformative right now. But we can't do that unless we're alive to the fact that those assumptions are running in the back of our mind. So when I think about what we're talking about, it's not, it's a crisis of many things, but it's also a crisis of knowledge and education. And higher education institutions bear a profound moral responsibility, as Tony writes, to increase awareness, knowledge, skills, and values needed to create a just and sustainable future. And it's not just higher education, of course, but we're sitting in an institute of higher education, and it's a great place to make that point. So I just resonate with your words about individualism, with what others have said about spirituality and ecology, and about just breaking ourselves free from these chains and these assumptions that we've been taught. I'll conclude just by saying how much I've enjoyed the storytelling here and how much I've learned from your stories. And there are all these cards asking, how do you engage? How do you create alliances? How do you do this? Well, you start by breaking down your assumptions, and then you start sharing your stories. You will find, like I have in the last 2 days, so much more in common and so many points of connection that even the questions about how you build alliances and how you do the work will dissolve very quickly into natural ways of being. And in addition to telling your story, I want to highlight the importance of wisdom, intergenerational knowledge. I'm sitting in this room very, very conscious of my mother and my father who has passed, and his presence feels very real in the room today, and my grandparents, and I'm very aware of my children and my children's children who are not even in existence yet. There's a real space and time that we're occupying and a real representation that we are, and I want to thank our sisters for reminding us of that and for bringing ritual into this conversation, for bringing children into this conversation. and for bringing our entire sacred selves and knowledge into this conversation. And I just want to thank the organizers for making this space possible. I'm so excited about what we're going to do together, and I have no doubt that we're going to be transformative because it's the only way we need to be right now. Thank you.
So I was hoping we'd have time to talk in tables, but we don't quite have time for that. But we do have a little bit of time, and we actually would welcome your reflections. So if anyone, brave souls, I know it's hard to follow Smita, but what are your reflections on what we've said, on what you've heard? Is there any inspiration you want to share with the group? And we can respond back and give thoughts. Or you can think about it for a minute, okay?
I haven't really got a lot out of this conference, but yeah, Steve Gluck, Harvard University. I got a lot out of this conference listening to all the speakers and all the stories and all the commonalities between peoples all over the world. But there's one thing I'd like to say is that I grew up in a highly degraded environment ecologically, Brooklyn, New York. But in the time I spent in Africa, I came to understand that I too am an indigenous person. I am as indigenous, my genetic endowment is identical to everyone on the planet. And I am as indigenous as anyone on that at that table. I just don't have the knowledge. I don't have the background. I don't have the experience. I don't have a tribe to go home to. But thank you for sharing what you have.
Other reflections, comments? Anyone want to respond to that? You can respond, Amber.
Yeah. I was just reflecting how tough that would be as an individual, not knowing where your land, where your connection and your origin begins. But also with saying that if we have the ability and the strength then to recognize how we came, each and every one of us, maybe to a foreign area, and then we have the choice now on how we utilize that land. And then we have the choice to create the system in which that land is produced and the access. So what we always say is you can have a connection to the land. I don't know the last time you have maybe put your belly button to your Mother Earth. Who has, right? Powerful. She'll heal you. She'll guide you. You reconnect to all the roots. And that's the struggle that you may have. But you do have a story, and you do have those traditions. And it's just really the choice then to understand what is a construction of colonial ideas, or you choose to reconnect with your people of origins because you may have come from a people who were then displaced. And actually you then reflect what we, in fact, may become 5 generations down the line. And so I know for myself as a mother, then I will fight harder to retain what we have, to retain our culture and our values, so that my people won't have that same story. Thank you.
Thank you. That was powerful. Anyone else, any other brave souls want to share your reflections or thoughts?
I'll go since no one else is. No, In the work that I've been doing, again, it's the women that have been at the forefront of the food movement. And I see it again here. So I know what we say back home about our young men, our boys, and the struggles that our male community is going through. But I would like to just hear from the panel, you know, from that perspective, because we do say back home that we need, there's a concept of balance back home, of male and female spirits and even our mixed spirits. So I don't know if there's something that you can talk about in terms of if that's something you're seeing as well in your communities or the work that you're doing, and what does that mean?
Asking this wonderful panel of women, please. Anyone have comments?
Well, yeah, Shade, for the question, my older sister. You know, I think it's interesting because we have a lot of academic jargon on this whole gender, feminist, whatever is LGBTQI, however we want to label it. But if we see each other as five-fingered individuals, if we see each other, because even in that Navajo concept, this is my woman's essence, and this is my male essence. And in terms of the demasculization of our sons, of our fathers, we could see that in different communities of color. And, you know, where is the place that they fit in terms of reconnecting us to our food? And so they're sprinkled along in this event, and they're held. I know your Harvard Law food club has a male president. But what we saw in a small town called Piñon on Navajo Nation is in the central area where it's very isolated. We almost call it where the Wild West begins, because that's the area where law enforcement practically refuses to go into. We have our Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is our trustee. They refuse. And so the people themselves have kind of taken over, and what we saw was gangs and violence happen to our young men. But some of the most dynamic work that we've done in terms of restoring our land and restoring our agriculture was getting these young boys in there, in the trenches, literally, re-examining the landscape, reconnecting themselves to their role in our village, in their role into our towns, into our society, re-engaging with them their purpose on why they're there. And although the wage economy might shut them out, although higher education might shut them out, that they still have a purpose to nourish their community, that they have the strength to move the boulders, to redirect the water. And what we saw with just a little bit of encouragement and that male teaching, that sweat, because that's for the man, for the male to be a part of, we saw that commitment from our young, our children, our boys, to then identify themselves as a Dene, identify their place and learn their songs and ceremony. And then they stopped identifying with the gang. They stopped identifying with the violence. And then they provided food to the community. They gave our corn, our ancestral corn, with all that knowledge and healing. They gave it. And what then they did was come back to the program, not through court order or restorative justice, but then they found their place. And so we reasserted them back into our community. And now they know the tools on how to feed themselves. They know and have relearned how to produce food. And then now they are the next generation of farmers. And so we can heal through what we're talking about here. We can heal our land and heal communities where maybe federal intervention and federal money never provided that opportunity. And so I'm a strong advocate. It's with our own voice, our own teachings, our own language that's going to heal ourselves. And so that's, I would say that's through storytelling, an example of how we bring them into the conversation, and then hopefully that will leapfrog into them becoming the hunters, the providers, the protectors that we need as Native women who are exposed to violence, I think 3 times the national average. And so we need them to come back home in that mental state, and our food is that access point for them. Thank you.
So I hate to close this conversation because I feel like we could probably sit here for a long time. There's so much more to say. What I want to do is invite up, we have some students who are the organizers who are going to just say a few closing remarks. So maybe if our panel can just stay up here just so we can kind of finish that. But then I invite people to stay here for informal conversation. I know there wasn't enough time to connect. So if you want to stay around, I'm sure some of the panelists have to go, but I'm sure some will stay around for a bit. And you can connect more and talk about some of these things. And really, we want to stay connected with all of you, too. So as I said earlier today, we've been so thrilled to have people come from last year, come back this year. Please stay connected to us and help us understand, how we can continue to break down these barriers between universities and activists and communities and across universities and bringing everyone together. I'm so honored that you all came out to be here today. And I'm going to turn over to Tommy to bring, and other students to come up, I think? Okay. All right. Please help me give a hand to our panel as well.
We'd like to thank our sponsors and our food donors, especially Equal Exchange, who donated for the 2nd year in a row. Thank you to them. We'd like to thank our speakers and our presenters and our panelists. Thank you so much. And as students, and especially law students, we'd like to thank the wisdom of the Food Law and Policy Clinic. Thank you so much for your wisdom and guidance throughout this process.
Just in addition to what Tommy said, we really want to thank the Food Literacy Project and our amazing coordinator, Margiana. We'd love to thank all the volunteers here. And actually, could the volunteers and the volunteer interpreters, Friends of MST and Why Hunger, if you're here, could you stand up so we can give you a round of applause? Anybody? So conference volunteers and organizers, so all of us and other people with the name tags, if you have any questions as you're leaving about the conference or the area, come find one of us. Thank you.
So we wanted to thank all of you for joining us here at the 2016 Just Food Forum on Land Use Rights and Ecology. We really value and appreciate your time in being here and joining us and dedicating your time, energy, and passions to having these amazing conversations with everyone else. And we've had a lot of amazing conversations. We've talked about a lot of things with a lot of different people. We've spoken with activists, farmers, researchers, students, and there's so much knowledge and inspiration in this room and in this community, and we really hope that you continue to share it with one another and with your own communities. Thank you.
So leading up to this conference, we have been trying so hard to make it very open, very access to those people who are actually at the center of the issue of land access and land struggles. During this conference, we have seen so many new conversations, new connections, a lot of new things emerging out of it, which we're super happy about. It is really, really rewarding to see a lot of you actually enjoying it, and we truly hope you can leave this conference feeling re-energized, feeling recognized, feeling appreciated for what you have done and what you're doing and what you will do in the future. And we would like to challenge you to do even more amazing and even more, like even bolder, even more exciting projects in the future. Thank you very much.
There have been a lot of thank yous, so I'm not going to keep it going except to thank all of you again. And I hope that there are some productive conversations and that you get to keep making new friends as you leave here today. So stick around as long as you want, and we hope to see you next year.